Supply chain exists because they are seeking for the most vulnerable and most marginalized workforce where they can cut costs, and they're looking for young women from the rural areas in Cambodia, in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, whether they work on electronics or garment sector. So the corporate greed, basically, or the dominance of corporations in terms of deciding and overriding nation states, and the nation states developing the idea of growth is based on export oriented export oriented growth. So they are falling in this trap, and where then they have to entice the foreign direct investment, and to get it they have to lower or almost have none labor standards in those zones. So that to me is one of the difficult situations in the supply chains. And to make things worse, now some of these countries have almost reduced the democratic space for organizing. This is happening widely in Cambodia, in Bangladesh. So organizing is getting more and more difficult. So on one hand, you have these exploitative modes of production where workers who come from the rural side or outside have to work for 10, 12, 14 hours at very low wages in very hazardous conditions. And then they can't organize, they can't organize themselves into unions or sustainable organizations to bargain for change. So these are some of the very difficult stages of the supply chain in present times. States, by constitution, are supposed to protect their citizens, but in practice, it is not happening. So a lot of the corporate nexus is causing the governments to defy their own constitution. In essence, state should provide, like what it has happened in many places in the world. State, because the power of capital or industry is so big that you have to give some protective measures to the labor, otherwise they stand no chance. So that protection is not existing right now, and it's very important. You need those institutions at grassroots level. We call them, I think in simple terms, there is lack of grassroots democracy, because supply chain extends in different nations. So there is questions of how can you bring it under any democratic control, because and which nation state can control it. And we elect representatives within one nation state, but this chain extends beyond nation state. So how do you bring it under some kind of democratic control? So in essence, there is lack of grassroots democracy and lack of institutions. Simply, they are not paying wages. There is a high rate of accidents, or they're exploited. They're exposed to hazards at workplace. If you had institutions of governance, like a strong factory inspectorate, which was answerable to the people in Bangladesh or in Cambodia, which would go inspect the factories and prosecute for being wrongdoings, with participation of workers, and that would make a difference. But that is the steps state should take, in building those institutions. Now workers are desperate, because if you are suffering, that's the situation at ground in Bangladesh, in Myanmar, in Vietnam, and many other countries. Like, the exploitation has reached to an extent that workers cannot tolerate anymore, including China. And there is no democratic space of engaging in any kind of dialogue, in organizing and then bargaining for your rights. So when you don't have that space, then workers come out and strike. So if you see, there are a lot of strikes happening right now across Asia, because they simply cannot tolerate this much exploitation. So the best way is if state can open spaces, basically let workers have freedom of association, and they can form their institutions, trade union institutions and other democratic institutions at ground, and that they can bargain for their rights. It's not happening right now. And just to answer your question, what can be done? Uh, you know, they keep on trying. Many authors put it, collective bargaining by riot. If you're not giving me democratic space, then I have to go on strike, and then you have to give something to us, because this is getting beyond tolerable limits. Despite the reduced democratic spaces, we have seen the awareness among workers, women, is increasing. They are not what we would, stereotype them as docile women who would just listen to. So the awareness is increasing, the use of technology is increasing, so they can quickly share the information through WhatsApp or Facebook or these new tools, and organize. So it's happening at a scale, at a larger scale. So there is hope. They're coming together, and things are changing. Like in 2012, women just walked out in Cambodia, out of the factories, and it was such an amazing movement. And then Cambodian government had to increase the wages. Similarly, in Bangladesh, the wage increase happened only because when these women walked out and said enough is enough. So there are encouraging signs. There is workers' dissent, and there is workers' unhappiness, and there is workers' activism. So now the challenge is, how can it be channeled in form of an institution which can, how can we institutionalize this process so that they can build this energy into some structural change in the supply chain?